Deborah, thank you so much for joining a Nonstop Nonprofit podcast with me today. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you today?
I am doing very good. Very excited for our conversation. You and I have been able to have many conversations in the past, and so I am looking forward to what's in store for today.
I am too. I always enjoy listening, so I'm excited to have some of our conversation together in this format.
Absolutely. So before we get too far along with today's topic, you have a long, rich history in the nonprofit sector, and so I'd love it if you could just share a little bit about your background, your nonprofit story, if you will, with our listeners here.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. So I feel like I came the opposite way of so many of us that are in nonprofit as I started on the other end. I worked for Allstate Insurance Company, and part of my role was giving away money. And I feel like many of us in nonprofit are like, when I get done, I'm going to go give away money. And I went the opposite way. I started giving away money. And when I left that environment, I thought, what do I want to do next? What did I love about my work? And what I realized I loved was those nonprofit organizations. I had the chance to be exposed to so many. I went into communications thinking that might be the right parallel coming from a corporate environment, but quickly realized I'm a fundraiser. I am very excited to engage people in a mission. And so from that went to a great local organization in the Seattle area, worked there for a while and quickly started consulting. So I also, again, feel like a little backwards. Many of us in nonprofits say, when I'm done working at this organization, I'm going to go be a consultant. And I, again, went backwards. I did that for about 15 years until one of my clients, who had been a client for 10 years, said, you really need to come inside in order to do the deep strategic work. In order to help us transform, you should be on staff. And that was March of Dimes, where after 10 years of being a client, I joined the organization. And then from there, went into other large health charity at MBA, and both roles scaling nationwide programs, fundraising, and teams. So very different path, I think, than some of our traditional fundraising teams may endure in their world, where they sometimes start almost immediately fundraising, almost immediately in
Yeah.
that space. I went backwards, and now I'm so thrilled to be here at Big Brothers Big Sisters of America.
We're definitely gonna get into that as well. If we could take one step back, kind of to zoom in a little bit on what you just shared, it sounds like, or how was that transition from consultant to inside? Coming inside,
Oh,
running fundraising. What were some of the benefits that maybe you were able to pick up as a result of now being in house versus on the service side?
I do think there was some truth to the you really can't transform the change management work that needs to happen for organizations to really evolve. That needs to be in house. While you can coach from the outside, arm in arm together, moving a team forward is different on the inside. What I felt like I brought, and I still have the benefit of bringing, is the exposure I had to so many organizations, what they did well, some of which being I was a great advocate and lead at Boys and Girls Clubs in local communities. I was really involved with local cancer organizations and their work, and then really grassroots organizations like the Hands On Network. So, bringing the best of all of those in house to an institutional organization like March of Dimes to set back and say, strategically, where do we want to go? How could we take and borrow, as we all do in nonprofit, borrow from others in our industry to scale elements of our work in a new way? And how do we also borrow from corporate America to scale and evolve our workforce with some great
Mm,
best practices of training, of employee development, and ensuring that those that were on the front line felt as though they had a career trajectory, an opportunity to be successful, and an opportunity to learn how. One of the feedback pieces I received from a staff that I hear in my head still today is, you helped us see how to do it, didn't just tell us what to do. And that was a big difference from what they'd experienced. I think that came out of so many years of consulting. You were teaching a partner or a client how to move forward. And what I felt like I gained out of being on staff was bringing that culture into the organization, but at the pace they were ready to accept and move forward through that change management.
yeah, that totally makes sense there. And something that's kind of struck me in our conversations we've had is you're a very strategic thinker, a very strategic fundraiser, and as a result, you've gone on and have raised tens of millions, probably more, for the different charities that you've been involved in. And so, can you talk a little bit about sort of the role like strategic planning plays? Right, because I think there's two different types of fundraisers, right? It's like the spray and pray. We're just going to try everything, and whichever one sort of like drives the most donations, we'll stick with it and we'll keep going. I feel like your approach, at least from the outside looking in at some of the programs you've developed in your background, it's very thoughtful, very strategic. And so, can you share a little bit about how that thinking has played into who you are as a fundraiser and as a leader in the space?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I laugh a little. I don't know what a big fan you are of your strengths finder, but
Uh huh.
strategic's my first. I almost
Okay.
can't move forward if there isn't strategy embedded, and then analytical is second. So they go very hand in hand. That I not only need to see the strategy ahead, I need to be able to analyze the outcome. So I
Hmm.
believe very strongly you have to start with the end in mind. What is the purpose of what we're doing? Whether it is an event or it's an individual appeal or we're trying to build a scaled campaign. Maybe we want to do a capital campaign or something else. If we're not starting with that end in mind, then no matter what, we'll miss something in this plan. And then the second thing is we may undershoot what the opportunity is. And that's where I felt
Ah.
like I have done a better job of pause and plan, even in the last few years, even if that pause and plan is a week. I'm not talking months and months pause and plan, but take that moment to think about what's the outcome you're trying to drive before we just run and jump in the water and start swimming. Where are we going? We need to look up a little first and know that direction. So for me, that's the beginning. And I'm doing that today where I'm at my new role, which has only been 2 months. It's a little real fast run, right? You need to onboard quickly. You need to get embedded in the organization, but over the last 2 weeks, it's time to pause. In order to get thoughtfully strategic with a 3-year vision, I need to move back a little on the gas. I need to stop a moment, assess what I've seen in that first 60 days, and now move forward in this next 30 to something that takes forth a 3-year vision, not just looking at what gets me the end of the calendar year. We sometimes
Totally.
the end result we're looking for is too short. It's like running the marathon. You can't look at the first 10 miles, you have to look at finishing the race.
Right. And that's one of the things when I was actively fundraising, it's one of the things I hated the most, and I never really figured out how to get around it. But it was essentially at the end of the year, December 31st rolls around, January 1st comes, everyone's celebrating, but then as fundraisers thinking, oh man, like my number just restarted. I'm back at zero. I just, worked so hard all year trying to hit this target, overachieving it. Now it all just stops and starts over again. That's probably the part of the culture that we had built. But when you think about it from like a long term perspective, how do you counter that sort of fatigue or that like that feels it's like an always uphill battle in fundraising? How have you overcome that through more of your long term thinking approach?
It's so perfect time. And I just left a conversation with a colleague in one of the agencies who does the same thing I do. They look at it in cycle. And I've always looked 3-year. This partner was looking at it in 5-year, which I think is fantastic if you can be that broad based. But I typically look at 3-year and you're always in the middle year of your funding. So you should have funders that are with you for that cycle so that when you hit January, you're actually not starting over. You have about a third in the bank for the next year because you raised it the year before and you were
Right.
forwarding it to the next year. Number one, it gets your morale a little better. You don't ever feel like you're just starting
You're
over.
at
I
zero.
just had to
Yeah.
grind. But the other is for a funder, you would get to develop relationship. Whether that funder is a corporation foundation or an individual donor, the goal is relationship. So as you bring them through a multi-year engagement, they deepen their passion for your work. They start to see their investment come to life, and you get to ensure the work doesn't stop. One of our challenges as nonprofits, whether we're funding research or like us, we're funding direct relationships out in the communities, we can't stop because the calendar flipped and the dollars stop coming in. We have to make sure that's sustained over time. So I believe really strongly in that cycle of fundraising where you're looking for a third continuing that have already been committed to that multi-year, a third renewing. They may be cycling, because of their fiscal year and their parameters. And then a third that you're looking at is new
Is
or
new.
expansion, growth, something different. But it helps the tone of the staff not feel as though you're there.
Totally.
And then it helps also, again, deepen that part of partnership so that for all of us, there's going to be a moment when we need to ask bigger and bolder. If we're doing that every year, if you compound over 3 years, you have this group of funders who are deeply engaged, who've been with you for a little while. And when you have the big, bold idea that you need champions around, you have a pool. They're finally
Yeah.
there. Or for many of us, when you have COVID, you have somebody to go back to and say, help us keep going.
Totally. Yeah. Man, so many good things that were just, I mean, I was like ten LinkedIn posts right there that I could just think about such good content. And we could do a whole podcast around sort of that 3-year cycle. I think that's super fascinating. Something else you mentioned that I wanted to come back to is you talked about when we're moving too fast, sometimes the opportunities could become smaller just because we're
Yeah.
we're not really thinking through the big picture. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think like a lot of times people confuse scale and growth for speed. And those two things are not dependent on one another. You could scale and grow without speed, or vice versa. And I remember, thinking about there's this opportunity we had when I was at Liberty North Korea with a major donor who had just started learning about the organization and wanted to contribute about 25 grand, which was well under the capacity of this individual. And, I actually did something that I've never done before. And I asked the donor, I was like, actually, hold on to the money. Before you give, I want you to learn more about the issue. I want you to learn more about how we're addressing it. I'd like to come spend some time with you. This individual was, out in Europe and went and spent some time, built a relationship, and ended up giving 250,000 instead of his 25K. And I think that's an opportunity, an example of, sometimes when we go too fast, we miss the bigger opportunities. And I love that you pointed that out and highlighted that, whether it's for event fundraising or just major donor, development. I think there's just a lot to really unpack there.
It's always have you ever been in a situation where someone said yes too fast? You leave that conversation, you went, "I didn't ask big enough." That is such a great
Exactly.
example that you shared because you gave them the chance to deepen that passion and that relationship, but you also didn't leave saying, "Oh, I should have waited and gone further because they can do more."
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. Obviously, you have to get to know individuals and understand those types of things. But yeah, interesting. Okay, so you recently became the chief development officer of one of, I'd say, America's favorite charities, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. Tell us about your new role as the CDO and what you're hoping to accomplish in the position.
Oh, thank you. It is the most fascinating organization to look historically at, and yet just as relevant from its founding over 100 years ago as it is today as a mission. The organization, Big Brothers Big Sisters, is focused on one to one relationships, mentorship. Every young person deserves a mentor in their corner, someone's championing for their success. And what I love about this organization is while we are well known across the nation. Our work today couldn't be more relevant as youth. 1 in 3 youth are missing that active role model mentor in their lives today. And we
Hmm.
think about the last year and a half, and we talk a lot about what the loss of education has meant. But 20% of our youth have lost their mentor over this time. They've lost that
Wow.
person who's on their side that's not a parent or guardian, really supporting their success and being a champion for them regardless of situation. What I love about Big Brothers Big Sisters, and part of my choice was to be as a woman of color in an organization that speaks to the community in which I am from and of. And I think it's really important that this organization thrive today for
Hmm.
our youth of tomorrow. It is where we are. What is exciting is I think people are realizing the investment in our youth is crucial and the investment in mentorship is crucial. And as an individual, even for you as a person and me as a person, to talk about, I'm where I am today because of the people who stood along and were models for me, where I could see myself in another. I was supported by someone outside of my parent or guardian. You can do this. You could achieve more. You should try for those coaches and those mentors in our lives at key phases of life, not just at age 12, but at age 19 as well. When I'm trying to decide what's after high school, those mentors are crucial, and it's part of what's got me so excited about this work it is time to come around the youth of today and
Mm,
ensure that not only do they have the opportunity to have that mentor, but that our workplaces are ready for them when they join, that they're able to see each other and those like them in places of leadership, and that the youth voice is honored. Look at what our youth did last year. Look at what our younger generations led in social justice. And with an organization that serves over 70% BIPOC youth, we are listening to that voice every day. And what we are doing is creating allyship across young people and their mentors who are not 70% BIPOC, candidly. So we're creating this inclusive environment,
mm,
building between diverse communities to ensure that our young people can thrive. So we look at it as who we were found, how we were founded, and what we do today. And we call it Jedi. It's face. We were born out of the justice system to build equity and inclusion through these diverse communities mounted on mentorship. And it's
mm.
working. It works today and it worked 100 years ago. And it's what I think is going to help us move forward as a nation in a meaningful way.
Wow, that's yeah. I mean, to think about, I mean, it's so much there, and one of the things that like stood out when you referenced, and I was going to ask a little bit about Jedi because I was looking into that, and it seems to be not as much about the culture today as you said in the during its founding, which really, I mean, makes Big Brothers Big Sisters of America incredibly relevant, especially for the time we're living in, when corporations and individuals are really examining how do we become more inclusive, how do we get better at these and very important topics today. And in many ways, Big Brothers Big Sisters is an example of how that can be done, really from the top down. And so, I know you've only been there for a couple months, but is this Jedi concept, is it something that it's a core value where every employee understands the importance, and it's what we really it's become a mandate of the organization. That's what it seems like from the outside, reading it more about it. But from your experience on the inside, is that how it is as well?
It's that and more. It's embedded and infused in every one of our programs. So you don't have a program like our workplace mentoring program that doesn't have Jedi infused in it. You don't have our Big Futures program that's really focused on growing services for those up to age 25, because guess what? We're not done developing just because we graduated from high school. We still need those mentors. It is in our programs that serve little girls and what they want to be as they age. So it is embedded in every program. It's embedded in us as a workforce. It's a curriculum of training that we share with our bigs to make sure that they're bringing that to our littles. And then in our entire network, all the staff are participating in. It is who we are. It's less of a check the box. It's authentically who we've been and who we
Yeah.
continue to be. And we make sure that it is what we live and breathe every day.
I wonder too. I mean, this is not on our list of questions, and maybe a little personal, so feel free to feel obligated to answer it. But I'm curious, in your experience as woman of color fundraising and being in this space for as long as you've been, like the challenges that you've encountered as a woman of color, fundraising, and then finally finding a home at Big Brothers Big Sisters, which feels like it has an environment where that's of empowerment. I'm just curious, is your journey, how that has been, and how this sort of your new position, how it's potentially been a refreshing look at the industry from a different perspective. I don't know if that made much sense, but
It
yeah, I
totally,
wanted to,
totally
yeah.
does. And candidly, it's why I excuse me, it's why I look for another role. And you are spot on. This is a journey. It is the first time, I will say, as a woman of color and the daughter of a first generation American, and I'm biracial. I'm both Pacific Islander and Hispanic. It's the first time I feel I'm able to bring my whole self to work.
Wow.
And that is a big statement coming out of nonprofit, where you would
Yeah.
think that as an industry, we made it very comfortable to bring your whole self to work. We're nonprofits. We all feel good. We all feel right. It does not appear that way, and especially for us that are fundraisers, because predominantly as fundraisers, I would argue that most of us still we analyze our data. The majority of our donors are still white. The majority of our donors are still very red leaning in their political space. And so we assimilate to our
Mm.
donor. We fall into that. And in the way that the Me Too movement for women fundraisers changed the boundaries, I remember feeling inappropriate early in my career and going, maybe maybe not the kind of environment I want to be in. And we all went through a
Yeah.
movement then. I do feel like those of us in the BIPOC community as fundraisers are going through that movement now, where we now are saying, wait, we actually can bring our whole selves to this table. We can share our own personal and cultural experiences in this, and that has value in the
Mm.
fundraising space. It has
Oh yeah.
value, especially when we represent missions like this one, where I'm not just representing me, I'm representing a little girl like me who someday is going to benefit from these services and support and get to have her own seat at a table she wants to be at. So it's
Yeah.
hugely empowering and very different in the workplace.
Yeah, and I mean, just the just to kind of piggyback on that, just like the representation. I mean, the most important thing Big Brothers Big Sisters is doing is providing mentorship for the youth. And so when these youth see representation and what they can achieve and what they can aspire to be, that's almost just as powerful as having a one-to-one mentor. For
Oh,
at least I can imagine is when you see someone that looks like you in a position that one day you want, it gives you that optimism to keep pushing. And so very inspiring, and thank you for sharing that. I know that wasn't necessarily on the agenda today.
no, I appreciate it. And you're right. If you can see it, you can be it. One of my colleagues recently wrote an op-ed and it couldn't be more true.
We gotta check where can we find that op-ed at?
Oh, I will share. It was just released,
Okay.
and you actually made me think of how our CEO was just on the Today Show last month, and a little boy I'm in the Seattle area. Little boy in the Seattle area said, "Oh, the guy leading Big Brothers, he's a little bit leading Big Brothers Big Sisters looks like me." It was a
Oh, that's
big
awesome.
deal, and to me, that was the best compliment our CEO
Yeah.
could have received from anyone that saw that coverage. It was the little boy who
Mm.
could see himself and then now see that I could be that. I could be the person leading an organization like this,
Oh, absolutely. I love that. Gave me the chills. Gave me the chills.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
All right, so let's dive into some more tactical questions here for the
I like it.
remaining part of our time. And so, when I think about a lot of your work and the leadership you've brought into the fundraising community, I think of revenue development, revenue optimization. You and I have had a lot of conversations just around a more omni-channel approach to fundraising. The more diversified it can become, the more successful you will be. We saw this to be the case during the pandemic for organizations that were more diverse and had a more omni-channel approach that weren't, dependent on one or two main sort of revenue streams. So if you could maybe just kind of, for our listeners, walk us through revenue development. When you talk about that, when you think about developing revenue at an organization, what does that mean to you, and where do you get started as a fundraiser?
Yeah, I so appreciate it. And I would say it is typically looked at as a three-legged stool. And where I'm starting is from that three-legged stool. It's the traditional foundation funding, right? That
Right.
corporate funding and that individual donor. And when I think about that three-legged stool, they all have an important place at that table, the base of the stool they create for us. But what I'm seeing more and more of is also not forgetting that there's some innovation in the nonprofit space, some that I saw early in my career where we can actually be entrepreneurial at the same time
Hmm.
and be funding our organization. So it's not quite a fully developed fourth leg for all of us, but for many of us, we're starting to transform there. I am not there today with where I'm at, but I know that it's coming. I know there is a place for that. And within those core three legs, I think it's really important to think about your ecosystem. I don't want a program that's overly dependent on any one funder in any area. And I also don't want my stool so lopsided that we are completely dependent on corporations and corporations hit a moment like last year and say, we're only funding this now. So we're taking away the money we would have normally given you, or individuals who same reacted a little like disaster fundraising last year
Right.
and gave to immediate need food, water, shelter as they should. But if we were overly dependent on any one leg of the stool, we wouldn't have been able to survive. So I feel like it's really important that your stool is balanced. Doesn't mean they're equal thirds, but it should be balanced from, again, that consistency of who's staying, who's the third you've built that long relationship with. And if you think of your legs as stool and section, that's the way I look at it. I feel like there's these moments in the stool that grow longer and longer. The third that stay with me through the 3 years, the third that are traditional renewals, and the third I'm building to make the stool taller and come together. I feel like that individual space is where there's some great innovation and
Hmm.
chance for us to evolve as an industry from peer-to-peer to gaming to now there's even more, I think, to come in NFTs and Bitcoin. As we see that evolve, we need to be ready for that space. In the way in the old days, you'd be ready for stock. And I think we have to meet young people where they are. I came from two legacy organizations prior, both in your homes as children, that taught you what philanthropy looks like. And
Yeah,
so now we have to think about what's teaching today's youth what philanthropy looks like and how are they giving at age 10 or 11 and what's that going to mean when they become 25, 35? How does that change their habits? So I feel like that individual leg is innovating at a pace that we all probably feel like we're behind on.
right. I think, and in some regards, I think the pandemic did help accelerate that third leg for a lot of organizations, realizing, and at least looking at sort of digital as an opportunity to start acquiring, more individual giving program. But what you mentioned just around going to where the donors are, especially when you're looking at like a younger donor demographic. We had Nick, the founder of Good United, on the podcast a few
Yeah.
weeks ago, and he said something which is just has resonated, and it's so true. And he basically said, like, I never go to an organization's website to make a donation, right? It's typically because they've found me somewhere, whether it's on Facebook or some other medium or channel. I was captured through the content that was created, the video that came up, whatever it might be, and that's what led me to give. And I think this is an area where lots of organizations can really further develop and accelerate growth around, is just the idea of going out to where donors are congregating, whether it's online, offline. And that's what I think makes, for a strong recipe to create an individual donor program. And one of the things we talked about, and one of the things you're doing at Big Brothers is helping develop the individual donor program. When you think about an organization your size, you would assume that that's something that's already quite developed. And so what is sort of the opportunities that you have to really kind of develop this third leg of the stool, if you will, at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and what areas are you most excited to really dive into?
Oh, excited. There are a multitude of areas I'm very excited to dive into. One being that youth engagement side. I think we are uniquely positioned to tackle a innovative engagement for young people and
Mm,
have their voice at the table as we develop it. It's one of the things we're committed to is lifting up a youth council to advise on key pieces of our strategic plan to serve alongside our national board and ensure that youth voice is always in the center. So I'm really excited about that part. The part I'm really eager to engage and grow is we are a network. We're a federated organization. A Big Brothers Big Sisters in California gets to engage their individual donors and create a whole program. But what we have the opportunity to do as an organization that's a network is create infrastructure, support, benefits, and access for their major donors to come to a larger table, to join the national movement of Big Brothers Big Sisters,
mm,
because the walls are falling down for all of us. And many of our major donors, while they may today live in that California team, they may move to the Massachusetts team and they still want to have their impact across the network. So, where we as the national entity and what I'm excited to build can come together is providing that donor that continuity of
mm.
mission across
Yeah.
every part of the ecosystem and where they get the opportunity to have access to things at a national scale because they're that invested in the cause, not just in their backyard, but for all young people in the country.
Yeah. Do you see a strong correlation between donors and mentors? Because one of the strategies a lot
Good
of nonprofits
question.
try to deploy is, if we get people to volunteer and engage sort of on like the volunteerism, they'll eventually turn into donors. And so, just curious with like your expansive network of mentors, how much of them are also supporting the organization, funding the organization, because that seems like a pretty organic, natural donor base.
It is exactly the same theory that I think everyone has, which is volunteerism and advocacy always make you a more valuable donor in the pipeline. We have put forth a mission, a purposeful mission to engage 1 million alumni. And what we mean by alumni is people who've served as bigs or were littles or were and champions. So champions would be people like former board members or key volunteers and committees, those people who've been passionate for our cause. We want 1 million of those alumni to come forth and help lead the movement. We've been around
Wow.
100 years. We definitely have more than 1 million alumni out there, but they aren't necessarily in the network today as active. And the reason they're
Right.
not active is they may have aged out. What is phenomenal, and the stories we want to bring forth, is you might have been a little in your childhood and you may not be a little today. You may choose to be a big. It's the most beautiful story when you become a big and were a former little, but you're likely also still in touch with your big. And they're still
Mm,
part of your life and coming to your wedding and celebrating the birth of your children as you are now an adult. Those are the stories we want to bring forward because we know that that's actually the end mission achieved journey we're looking at, right? Is when you get to be the little that is now mentoring another and still in touch with your mentor from your youth. This alumni challenge for us is that opportunity to bring that volunteerism thread together and let them engage in the way that's meaningful for them, because I do believe you need to let volunteers drive some of that passion
yeah.
that is their activation.
It's like the perfect segment of supporters to build a strong recurring donor program. And
100%.
I feel like you guys have a network. You could build one of the largest recurring donor programs in the nation based off of kind of that. I mean, it's such a value when you have that experience. As I'm talking about from a mentor's perspective, when you see the sort of the value that you were able to add into someone's life, without a financial contribution, more of just a time contribution, you see that impact. And like, how do I like magnify this? I can't like scale myself. I only have so many hours. How do I make this more possible? I invest in, and I'm like selling for you now, but I love the concept. I love that going after these people that have been engaged and have actually experienced the impact. Because when you have supporters that have experienced the impact firsthand of what you're doing, this is why we took donors all the time to Southeast Asia to see the North Korean refugees, that they were actually funding their escape and rescue. When they saw that, they became lifelong supporters. And I think that's whenever you can do that as an organization, it becomes such a powerful tool for fundraising.
I'm on a roll, Justin. I've been here 2 months. I have not been in a meeting with multiple people where someone wasn't a former big, a former
Wow,
little, or a former board member. So far it's a streak because the organization touches that widely.
that widely, yeah,
We have a network of people who've kept this mission alive for 100 years and
that's
keep
awesome.
serving youth today.
That's amazing. All right, so a few more questions. Again, I could talk to you forever. Another interesting parts about your career is you've developed one of the larger peer-to-peer programs in the space, right? When nonprofits step back and are building out their peer-to-peer channel, they often are looking at the March of Dimes of the world in regards to, how do we achieve this type of success? And so I'd love to kind of just dig in here a little bit, and especially as organizations are gearing up for end of year, gearing back up for live events, in-person events, or at least a hybrid of the two. Any sort of thoughts around your learnings while building up one of the larger peer-to-peer programs? What can people borrow from your expertise? Whether it's the successes or the failures that you think are important for fundraisers to understand?
Well, the one joy we all experience in peer to peer is the walls came down on event day being the thing you were coming together for last year, right? We all put a lot of effort, and I have to say I inherited a beautiful program at March Dimes. They were the first organization to institutionalize walk as we all know it today. That big peer to
Mm,
peer model. They
yeah.
did it back in the late 70s and early 80s, and we all copied like we all do again in nonprofit their experience and personalized it. They were the granddaddy of the walk experience in the same way that I was able to go to MBA, who was the granddaddy of the telethon with Jerry Lewis, and it was in
Ah,
your living room. So I have had the privilege of inheriting
I'm still a sucker for the
the
telethons.
gift. Uh, and we were able to bring the telethon back at MDA last year
Oh,
in a
nice.
new way. We revitalized it with someone, Kevin Hart, at the helm, who was relevant,
Oh,
but
nice.
virtual. How do
Yeah.
you do it differently for today's generation? How do you do walk differently? I think what freedom we all received was venue was anything. You
Yeah.
could be anywhere and walk or run or jog or bicycle or golf or whatever you did. We made it very free. It almost became donor's choice in a way that some of us might have been afraid of before. And it was
All
a
right.
little because we felt like we needed that deadline. If we don't have walk day, people won't raise money. If we don't have activation in the first 30 days, they won't raise money. If we don't have these challenges, they won't raise the milestones. What I found is engagement was key. So communication with those donors, that, just like always, your team captains and your champions, your top teams, the incentives, while important, were not vital last year, especially last year. And I think what it taught us is many of us felt like the prize is what got them to the next level in peer to peer. What the pandemic fundraising taught us was there's actually care here. I care about
Hmm.
your cause. I don't
Yeah.
need you to send me another windbreaker with your logo on it. It's great if you do, but it's not really why I did it. I did it because I care. And you said something earlier. Someone engaged me. I showed up on a stream. Someone engaged me. That my friend asking, my friend storytelling why they're supporting March the Dimes, MDA, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. That's why I clicked, because I respect my friend and
Hmm.
I respect the causes they care about. And I do want to make a difference and I trust them. I trust my
Yeah.
friend chose a cause that's worthy that I will stand behind. So I think we gave our champions a little freedom last year. And I see many of the big guys letting that continue,
Yeah.
thinking about a new way to keep peer to peer going that isn't so rigid about what day of means and what the
Hmm.
activity means for the participant. I think the same thing's happening in breakfast galas, luncheons.
Yeah.
Some hybrids going to continue. We are not going to go all back to a ballroom of 1,200 people. We're going to keep being hybrid for a while.
Yeah. I mean, where I'm a board member at this organization I mentioned earlier, Liberty North Korea, and I'm on the gala committee helping plan the galas this fall. And, regardless of what happens with, this new Delta variant, whether it means we have to go, completely virtual, in the best case scenario where that's not the reality, and we could have these events, we're still actually optimizing for a virtual audience. And I think this is really the future of live events. Instead of having 300 people, see your programming that you spent a lot of money and time on, why not 10,000 people or 100,000 people, however many as possible? And so I love this idea of like opening up events, making them more accessible for all demographics, and also seeing and decentralization of peer to peer, and it being able to be along people's schedules. I think that there's definitely ways to continue to optimize it, but totally agree, and I'm seeing that and seeing yeah, that sort of be the new trend. So it'll be interesting as we, 2, 3, 4 years from now, how this evolves, and how it's really optimized for further growth, and so forth.
I agree with you. I feel like we were given a gift last year of innovating and letting go of old things that maybe we held sacred in those event models that we
Yep.
were given permission to let go of and now try something new. And we don't have to go back. We get to go forward.
Totally. The fear is, and even when we were discussing this on the board, the fear that many of the fundraisers had was, around donor cultivation. Well, like this is how we cultivate major donors. And so, I
Right.
mean, outside of well-run events, what are your thoughts around cultivating these major donors around experiences or other opportunities for engagement? Have you found new ways or new strategies to better cultivate?
100%. And I feel like I've seen all of us do such a great job. Here at Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, one of the things we lifted up was we use Facebook Live like everyone else is, and we lifted up a new resource called Race, Relationships, and Resources. It's open to anyone, but we use it as an opportunity to go to major donors and say, please join this forum. Listen in. If you can't listen live, here's the link. And then I'd love to have a conversation with you
Mm,
about what you heard, because now we've created dialogue. We're not
yeah.
just saying, look at my show on the stage, which is what the event is, and it is what this forum is, but we're actually creating the door open to have the next meeting. I always
I love
I
that.
always say that our goal is always for the next conversation. It's not just for
Yeah.
today. It's to keep talking.
Yeah.
So I think this innovation of having just storytelling. Think about the parts of your event that are just storytelling of impact. We get to storytell of impact and now use it as a conversation moment with the donor far more meaningfully than maybe before. And by the way, think of how all of a sudden the last year has given you access to donors in a way you didn't before. You used to have
Yeah.
to travel to them. You
Yep.
used to have to make these big appointments, and now you're meeting them in their backyards. Some of them are working in their bedrooms, and you're seeing their dog run by or their cat on the computer just like you. it's created this equity between donor and fundraiser, and it's giving you access to an intimate side of them you may have not seen before. And I think it's something that we all have to remember our early lessons as fundraisers. We were taught to observe in the office. They had an award for this on the wall. They had this photo of their children and grandchildren, and these were insights to the conversation. Well, now behind them, what are you seeing? Where are they sitting? Where are they calling you from? How was their quarantine time and who was with them? You just received a gift of knowledge about your donor through these conversations that otherwise you wouldn't have received.
Such a good perspective. Yeah, I didn't even think about sort of the, the from the equity perspective, humanizing, like, everything, everyone's become more humanized, through this experience. And so I love how that specifically relates to donor cultivation and building up relationships. So very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Two more questions. We're running a little late, and so hopefully we're okay here on your time schedule.
We're good.
Something that and this again makes a lot of sense. You talked about strategic and analysis being some of your top strengths, and so you talk a lot about developing using data, responsive data, to create donor centric teams. And so the question that I have is how can you leverage data to be a more donor centric team?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is interesting. Many of us are students of Penelope Burke and that idea of donor-centered fundraising, and I feel like it's taken a new level. We want to be donor-centered, but with mission always there, right? We never want to lean so far that donor wins over mission. It is that beautiful middle space. But what we are able to do now with data in a way that I don't know that we were able to even 5 years ago is tell our story of impact in more real time. So here at Big Brothers Big Sisters, we take, for example, a youth outcome survey every single year. And our youth tell us, and the mentors share their feedback in a separate feedback system where we can see if we're making progress in real time. We're not waiting until you have graduated high school and are now that adult we talked about earlier. We are now seeing that you feel in 10th grade, you are on track for a path to graduation and a plan for your future. And you
Mm,
can say that confidently, and we can see it progress through your journey with us. That data goes then to the donor to say, donor, look at how your dollars are making an impact on children today. And look
mm,
at how we're able, even through the pandemic, to maintain connection with our youth and they still feel confident in spite of this learning loss we spoke about, in spite of this time alone, they still feel confident they have a plan for their future. That for a donor is the kind of impact they want to see. And that means that they see the difference their dollar is making. They don't need to see what does every dollar do. They need
right.
to see how's the real change happening. And this has given us the chance here to get away from $1 means X to your gift is changing this life in this way.
Hmm. Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And so the sort of the data kind of supports how that change is happening, what's happening, and therefore, it makes your team more donor centric because you're able to relay the impact in a much more articulate way back to the donor, where they feel that, hey, this was a really great investment of time and money into this mission. I can actually see the results that are being driven, and I understand where the organization is going. Love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. So I have to ask this last question just because we are turning the corner here in Q3 and gearing up for a very busy end of year giving season, regardless of fiscal, whether you're on the fiscal year, calendar year. So any advice for organizations as they gear up for Giving Tuesday, end of year, any advice that you would give as nonprofits navigate this busy season?
What works still works is one. Meaning what worked before pandemic of matching gifts work,
Yeah.
good communication and good storytelling still work. Those are still very important. But the other is continue to be bold. What all of us did as fundraisers last year, we lost our fear of asking because it was vital for our organizations to stay open. It was vital for the mission that we asked without fear for a donor to join us, to be at our table, to rise to the occasion. No gift was too small. No gift was, not important enough to pursue. That is still where we are. And we shouldn't lose that boldness because our missions across the industry matter. We are making social change. We are driving innovative research. We are the people who are ensuring our youth have these opportunities to see themselves in their futures. We are doing all that work in philanthropy
Mm,
and in the nonprofit space. So don't be afraid to continue that boldness that we had
yeah,
last year. There's some things that
totally.
we should hang on to.
Absolutely. I love it. And I think, that what I'd add on to that is the incredible service you're providing the donors by allowing them to give, the way it makes them feel about helping and being a part of something bigger than, you can't buy that, and so as fundraisers, you are really the gatekeeper into helping donors feel a lot better, which, not to make that, I don't not want that to be, taken necessarily out of context, but it's an important motivator of why a lot of people give, and it's an important, as a fundraiser, that's an important responsibility to have
That's
in
right.
my opinion. And so,
I had a mentor say to me, it's an honor to be asked. And we all have to remember the way you just said that is an honor
mm,
for that donor to be asked to give a gift. And we give them that honor.
absolutely, yeah, that was a lot better articulated than how I did it.
That's
And
why I
so,
stole it from a mentor.
well, Deb, thank you so much for your time and just all that you shared. Really excited to continue our conversations outside of the podcast. But thank you for just giving us your time today and sharing your insights and your experience. We really do appreciate it.
Thrilled to be invited. And thank you for hosting the podcast. Many of us in the industry listen. I like to hear from each other. So we appreciate the forum.
Absolutely. We'll keep it going then. All right, Deb, have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much.